Hi all, I'd like to look at Nakamura's 7th round win versus Ruzan Akobian. Both these players, by the way, I bumped into in the Gibraltar tournament earlier in the year, and I actually played a blitz game with Nakamura, and he thrashed me. Akobian was also, I was chatting to him quite a lot, even before the event. We'd bumped into each other at the airport. He gave a great lecture on the French defence to many people. And in this game it was a French defence. I don't know whether to flip board or not. Let's keep it from White's perspective. So he's a bit of an expert in this opening system. So it's interesting to see what happens. After knight c3, knight f6, Ruzan's wanting to close up the position, invite White to play e5, and Nakamura did that, and now played f4. Now after c5, knight f3, knight c6 was played, and bishop e3, all theory so far. There's a bit of a controversial line now with queen b6, which I think has gone out of fashion, with knight a4 and a piece sack. You would have seen that in quite a few of my blitz games where black's sacking a knight. But Ruzan plays a safer line than that, so that's probably unsound anyway. So he plays a6, just with the idea of queenside expansion. So queen d2 now, b5. So White's still got a good grip on the d4 square at the moment, and because of that plays h4. So h4 is not just a hack attack strategy when black is going to castle kingside, but also if the pawn goes to h6, it provokes g6, and the dark squares are weakened a bit further. So there's a positional emphasis there as well. After c takes d4, it seems as though this is quite a committal decision to release the tension in the position, but it frees black's game a bit now, these exchanges, and to play bishop c5 in one move instead of, say, moving the bishop first to e7. So there's a logic behind it. It's challenging the d4 control by White, and furthermore now black puts even more pressure on d4 by playing queen b6. So black's play is fairly logical, but Rybka's still, it gives White's position a slight edge, 0.23 at this stage at a certain depth. There's a slight nagging edge, which is to be expected. I think often, with this aggressive pawn chain, it's easy for White to have a long-term advantage, because naturally black's resources are not available if black castled kingside, like the f6 square for a knight. So that the aggressive pawn chain giving White's pieces naturally more scope, and black's pieces, the defensive task is a bit harder than usual. So anyway, White castles queenside, and that's fairly logical. This pawn can still be used to play h6 and weaken the dark squares. And also in this line, this rook is kind of useful sometimes on the third rank, and we'll see that actually that did become apparent in this game. Black castled into it, in effect, not too scared about h6. It's difficult for White to actually go for a direct assault here. But what Nakamura does is actually switch attention quite cleverly later to the queen side. Potentially, there's a 3-2 pawn majority here if black lost the d5 pawn. And these pawns did become significant later, as we're about to see. So bishop takes c5, knight takes c5. Now the opportunity has arisen, because black's just released the pressure on e5. The opportunity has now arisen and pounced on by Nakamura to play f5. He played just this queen c7. So Nakamura was tempted to just provoke to just defend that pawn, spending an extra tempo. So he's still got the potential threat now of f6. So now Akobian takes, and h6 is played, so weakening the dark squares, and now knight takes d5, regaining the pawn, because that's the downside of taking on f5. d5 was weakened and offered in exchange. So black's got these double pawns now, and White's majority on the queen side is more emphasised, the 3-2 pawn majority. So White stands better here. And knight f6 is also available. So this is a fairly unpleasant position now for black. Ruzan's been weakened on his dark squares, a horrible entrenched knight on f6. And, White's pieces still, are better in scope. And there's also this possibility of this rook still switching over. So he plays now queen b4. The knight's vulnerable. So Rusin plays knight e6, and now we see rook h3. So these rooks are much freer than the black rooks, especially this rook coming from the h file. So bishop b7, rook d1. So white's got nice control of the d file as well. So rook d6 is a nice outpost to have. So let's see if black tried to challenge it naturally with rook d8. Rook c3 is kind of unpleasant. And if a move like queen b8, now here knight d7 just wins the exchange. So black's under real pressure. If queen e7, that might be okay. But what Rusin didn't want, perhaps is that sort of incredibly passive-looking position. And actually, he played, bishop e4. So after rook d6, bishop e4. So maybe this does, according to Rybka, technically, increase white's advantage, because it is a pawn sacrifice. So he's just losing a pawn there after knight takes. And there's still pressure on black's position here. So what black could have done, well, according to Rybka, is play queen c5. And it does seem terribly passive though. So rook a3, and it's not the end of the story now. These queenside pawns are being victimized in this variation. So for example, rook fd8, rook b6. It's as if I think white can start driving an advantage through, like with b4. It's the advantage is increasing now. Knight a4, rook d6. There's the potential now for c4. So maybe black's on a slippery slope here. Rook dc8, now c4 is almost, it's increasing the advantage. So this is the kind of passiveness which maybe Jacobin he wanted to avoid. So he played this pawn sack, bishop e4, and after queen e4, rook ad8, rook hd3. Maybe he was just trying to reach an endgame he could possibly try and draw. But it does seem a very difficult task. Queen e3, not just protecting h6, stopping queen g5 checks, but also, potential invasion on the queen side. And now, snapping up this pawn. I mean, Rusin, if he tried rook a8 on his last move, then rook d7 seems really powerful. But actually, Rybka doesn't think much of rook d7 because of queen c5. It actually prefers g3, just a waiting move, asking what black's going to do, and bishop g2. So just improving the piece as well. So not just a waiting move. This bishop's now really good on the diagonal. And after that, this just gets worse and worse. Can rook takes a3 be played now? No, knight c5. So that's why Rybka's saying rook a3. And so slowly, putting more pressure on black's queen side. So anyway, after king g8, rook takes a6 was played here. So is there knight c5 here? I wonder. Let's have a quick look. Knight c5 here. There's rook takes d8. That's the difference. So basically, rook takes d3 was played. Bishop takes, queen b7. So hitting a6 and g2. So has Jacobin created some counterplay? After rook d6, queen takes g2. There's now a 3-1 pawn majority on the queen side. And 3-0 now after bishop takes b5. So these pawns are very dangerous. And Jacobin, he's got a passed g pawn. So he uses that, g5. Rook d1, queen h2. So he's making way for his g pawn potentially. But I think it's too little too late. The a pawn is more significant, especially with this bishop able to go to c6 to autopilot down to its destination square. So a5, bishop d7 is nasty as well, threatening bishop e6 and queen g5. So driving the knight to where it doesn't necessarily want to go. b4, so these pawns are now coming forward even more. a6, and the writing's on the wall for this pawn just landing on a8 very soon. So king b2, after queen a8, bishop c6, and Rusin resigned. So out of the opening, it seemed black was on the back foot here with this queenside expansion plan, because white, cleverly used a dark square strategy with this h pawn movement, which also actually was part of a rook scope strategy for the rook to come to h3 and menace, black's queenside pawns later. But the dark squares in general were always a problem, and the better scope of white's pieces. So this pawn on e5 was just playing an amazing role in providing these very nice outposts as well on f6 and d6. This pawn sacrifice was a little bit desperate, and it didn't really generate much counterplay for black. So it was a bit of a passive game, and now the queenside pawns just became very decisive. So there's various ways of skinning the cat, and Nakamura decided that the easiest way was just to push his queenside pawns, not go for a direct kingside attack. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.